Well, hello everyone. This is Barry Jones with SP History, and we are working our way through the Miami series. And in these first few episodes, my goal is to show or demonstrate all the different moving parts that were living in Miami, South Florida, that had motive, that had reason to want to participate in an assassination of JFK in 1963. That's what we're building towards. And of course, where we are right now is that they're all motivated to assassinate Castro, and their passion is directed south towards Cuba, but it won't stay that way. And, I've done a pretty exhaustive series of episodes on what I believe are five conspirators who worked together to assassinate JFK, three of whom came directly from South Florida, Miami. They were all cohabitating, so to speak. And that would be the Cuban population, which were mostly male and of military age and extremely motivated to want to overthrow Castro when they came to Miami. Their intent was never to stay in South Florida permanently, but to uh, lick their wounds after having to flee Cuba, organize with whomever would join their cause, and then return to Cuba victorious. So you've got them, and then you've got the organized crime element. Episode one was the Cubans, and I gave you just sort of a laundry list of different militant Cubans who were living in Miami at the time. Episode two was organized crime elements that were located in Florida, South Florida, Miami area. Uh, Santos Trafficante being chief among those, as being sort of the hub of the wheel, so to speak, that everyone used or worked with or partnered with to try to accomplish this goal of overthrowing Castro. So you got the organized crime, and of course they have their motives to want to overthrow Castro, primarily being the fact that he's costing them $100 million a year in lost income. And then you have this third one, which we're going to talk about today, which is the CIA, which was Miami is just overrun with CIA personnel. So we're going to go through that today in episode three. And going back to what I was saying about the five conspirators, you know, LBJ and the Secret Service, two of my conspirators, and though they're not directly related to Miami or South Florida necessarily, um, they had their role to play in the assassination. But the foot soldiers, the mechanics, the gunmen, the shooters, uh, and then helping with the cleanup afterwards to prevent witnesses from testifying, et cetera, et cetera. Um, that was taken care of by the other three conspirators, the Cubans, the mob, and the CIA. And of course, the CIA was leading the charge with all this. They're making the decisions, they're setting the policy, they're hiring or partnering with the CIA, who was hiring the Cubans to be the foot soldiers. So if you were to prepare a hierarchy, a list, ranking chronological in order of importance, you'd put the CIA at the top. And all right, so today we're going to be looking at another group of people in Miami, South Florida, and that is CIA operators. We're going to go through a list of these people, introduce, because, when we get into the actual mechanics of this conspiracy and we start talking about names and who's doing what, you can refer back to episodes one, two, three, and even some of four to see who these people are. Sometimes it gets lost who these people are. It's just a barrage of names. And so I'm trying to separate these names into different categories so you can see who they were affiliated with, and how they all work together in unison. Kind of reminds me of when I was young, and I don't remember who taught me. I think it was my mom taught me how to braid hair. Yeah, I don't know why she taught me how to braid hair, but anyway, I I learned that you take the three strands of hair and you weave them for over across, and then tighten it at the end, and then secure it at the end. And you take three strands of hair and turn it into one strand of hair, one braid. that's really what's going on in Miami during this period of time, where three strands of hair are turning into or being converted into one. You got the mob in one hand, you got the Cubans in another, and here's the CIA in the middle, and you're weaving them. And you're finding out when you get to the end result, which is JFK assassination in 1963, you're finding out that they're all working together, which is why the Warren Commission, the FBI especially, was so intent on preventing the Warren Commission from studying anything coming out of JM Wave, Operation Mongoose, any plot against Castro, any Cuban connection, any mob connection, even. I mean, they went so far as to say Jack Ruby had no mob connections. They didn't want anybody. If you study the mob too long, it leads you back to Miami and the plot against Castro. If you study the mob too long, it leads you to a partnership with the CIA and again to Miami and a plot against Castro. If you study the Cubans too long, of course, you start in Miami. And of course, it's pretty clear what their motive is right from the get-go. But again, it leads you to a partnership with the mob and with the CIA. And then everything changes. So it had to be Lee Harvey Oswald. All right, here's one of the first CIA operators located in Miami. I've mentioned his name prior. His name is Ted Shackley. And here are a few different dispensations of photographs for him. He began his intel career as part of the Allied occupation force in Germany after World War II, which was a big thing. Of course, back then it was OSS, and then that later converted to CIA. But to stay behind in Germany, not and perform really a dual purpose, which was to uh, effectively run Germany and prevent the return of Nazis, et cetera, but also to be on the front lines against communist expansion, which was what we were really afraid of after World War II. He had knowledge of the Polish language, and so, as is the case with Intel, they're always looking for people who speak more than one language, bilingual people. He was recruited into the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps to recruit Polish agents. And of course, if you know, that's because Poland was one of these countries controlled by one of these satellite states controlled by the Soviets afterwards, after World War II. And so they're looking for Polish-speaking agents. He's sort of the guy in charge. He's recruiting them for the Army Counterintelligence Corps, who can blend into Polish society and keep us apprised what's going on in the Soviet part of the world. He was also recruited into the CIA during this period. In 1953, he begins working for William Harvey, and those two will stay joined at the hip for a long time going forward. He and William Harvey. We'll talk more about William Harvey in a minute. And anyway, William Harvey is his boss at the CIA Berlin station. There's a good movie called The Company, and it's portraying William Harvey in his capacity as boss of the CIA Berlin station after World War II. All the intrigue is going on in that Berlin station. It's a long movie. I think it's like 3 different parts, but it's a good movie worth checking out. He was nicknamed the Blonde Ghost because he hated to be photographed. It's amazing we have this number of photographs of him. And then with Harvey, Shackley became involved later in the CIA's black operations. That's primarily a policy called executive action. We're going to talk more about this when we get into William Harvey, but of course, we've talked about this many times before. Executive action was a U.S. policy coming out of the CIA to target foreign heads of state with foreign mercenaries or foreign criminals. It's a plan to overthrow their governments and or to assassinate unfriendly foreign leaders. That's the distinction. I can't say this often enough. People oftentimes get executive action and ZR rifle confused, think they're the one and the same, conflate the two. They're separate. Executive action was a CIA plan to assassinate foreign heads of state or topple their governments or both, using foreigners, either mercenaries or criminals. ZR rifle was a CIA covert operation to target American threats to what they said threats to world peace. So it was targeting Americans using already identifiable CIA assets. in other words, Americans. So executive action was targeted towards foreigners, using foreigners. ZR rifle was targeted towards Americans. It really only had one target. ZR rifle, if you look at the date, the start date and the end date, it started 6 months before, or 6 months after JFK became president, about 3 months after Bay of Pigs, and it ended 6 months after he died. There was really only one target for the life of ZR rifle. So anyway, this sort of tells you what Shackley is, what he's involved in. Anytime you see anybody working with William Harvey, you know that they're working in something having to do with assassination, because that's all William Harvey did. And Shackley and Harvey are joined at the hip. After Bay of Pigs, this is 61, JFK created a committee called the SGA, and it had one job. It was to overthrow Castro. It's got a lot of people think that he, some of the misnomers about Kennedy is after Bay of Pigs, he quit trying to get Castro. It's not true. He actually doubled down. It became like his obsession, he and his brother. And they just changed the name of it from Operation 40 to Operation Mongoose to fool Khrushchev. Remember, he had made a promise after Bay of Pigs to Khrushchev he wouldn't mess around Cuba anymore. But he had no intention of keeping that promise to Khrushchev. His promise he was going to keep was to all the people who had gotten him elected. The Cubans down in South Florida, the CIA, which was a big piece of the reason why he got elected, and of course the mafia, and their obsession was to get rid of Castro. And so he just changed the name from Operation 40 to Operation Mongoose. This committee chose Ed Lansdale. Actually, it was Bobby Kennedy, who was the Attorney General, chose Ed Lansdale to run Operation Mongoose out of D.C. And Lansdale appointed William Harvey as head of Task Force W. Task Force W was charged with organizing, quote, a broad range of activities that would help bring down Castro's government. And then they had a CIA base that would be the headquarters for all things Operation Mongoose. And Ed Lansdale chose Ted Shackley to be the deputy chief of the Miami-based JM Wave Station. So when we get to the time frame that we're speaking about, Ted Shackley is in Miami leading this JM Wave Station, working hand in hand with William Harvey, who was running Task Force W. And Operation Mongoose is a continuation of Operation 40, which is sabotage, it's propaganda, it's raids against Cuba, their sugar fields, plantations, et cetera, just trying to cause havoc in Cuba and have it all blamed on Castro. Task Force W is exploring a broader range of activities, including executive action, to help overthrow Castro. Of course, executive action is assassination. So here they are working as partners together in this effort to bring down Castro. And they're working out of the Miami base, JM Wave, which, by the way, my wife and I are in the Miami area currently, and you can't get close to it. The base is abandoned, and my intention originally was to go, just like I did in Dallas, New Orleans, do a walking tour. I wanted to go to this JM Wave Station. Here you see pictures of it. Even if it's abandoned, I just like to film walking amongst the buildings, kind of get a sense for where this place was and what it was doing. But you can't get close to it. It's on the University of Miami South campus, which is located about 12 miles south of the main Miami campus. And just like all these CIA bases, they're in hard to reach, out of the way locations, obviously. And they're fenced off. They're high security zones now, even though it's not even being used anymore. You can't get to it. And it's regrettable. I wish I could get closer to it. I'm going to see what I can do to get to the South Campus and see if I can see it from afar, like I did the mental hospital in Louisiana, but probably not. Anyway, that's where this JM Wave Station is located. Remember now, I had pointed out to you earlier in this earlier video the 5 Operation 40 bases that the CIA was operating out of, which later became the 5 Operation Mongoose bases, which is later where the S Force was spread out amongst. And these were all in far away, hard to reach locations. One was in the Everglades. Try reaching try getting to the CIA base in the Everglades. One was off Swan Island, off the east coast of Florida. One was off No Name Key, which is one of the Florida Keys. And then two were in New Orleans, off the south end and the north end of Lake Pontchartrain. So, they intentionally put these bases in places where you can't, the public is not going to have access to them. In April of 62, Shackley was one of those involved in delivering supplies to Johnny Rosselli, who was one of these organized crime figures down there, as part of Harvey's plan to assassinate Castro. In my previous video, I went through that whole scenario where they drove a truck loaded with supplies, made a trade down in Miami, handed the keys to Johnny Rosselli, who took the truck full of supplies, weapons, ammo, etc., and they just handed off this truck to him. So Shackley and Harvey are involved in that. Later that same year, so you can see there's collusion between the CIA and the mob. Ted Shackley is the head of the CIA base in Miami, and he's working with Johnny Rosselli, who is the liaison to organized crime, between organized crime and CIA. So clearly there's collusion. Later that same year, he became head of JM Wave in Miami, gaining control over all the anti-Cuban Castro operations out of the Miami station. So if you're looking at it in chronological order, April, when he makes this delivery to Fidel Castro, he's just operating as a CIA Operation Mongoose operator. And then later that year, he because of his contacts, largely because of the work he'd done prior and his relationship with William Harvey and with these people like Johnny Rosselli, you get in a relationship with Johnny Rosselli, that puts you in a relationship with Santos Trafficante. You're in a relationship with Santos Trafficante, that puts you in a relationship with all the Cubans. And those are the ones being used for for everything coming on JM Wave anyway. So Ted Shackley made perfect sense. His relationship with Harvey, Rosselli, Santos Trafficante, etc., etc. So by the time we get to the end of 62, Shackley is in charge, and he's living down here in Miami. In the winter of 62, we get to an operation called Operation Tilt. This is, and I've discussed this earlier as well, one of the militant Cubans that we talked about in episode 1 of the Miami series, Eddie Bayo, claimed that there were 2 officers in the Red Army in Cuba that wanted to defect to the United States, and they had details of all the missiles, atomic warheads and missiles that were still in Cuba and still operational, even though there had been this so-called agreement between Kennedy and Khrushchev after the Cuban Missile Crisis. In other words, what these 2 officers are saying is that Khrushchev lied in the deal, has not been removing the missiles, and Kennedy was duped. It's going to be hugely embarrassing information to Kennedy and the government. And Eddie Bayo and the Cubans, by the time we get to the end of 62, starting 63, they're full in on trying to embarrass Kennedy because Kennedy's not working quick enough to get rid of Castro. And they want to give further evidence of how dangerous this guy is 90 miles off our coast. They're harboring all these, they still have these missiles aimed at us, and our president got fooled. Anyway, Eddie Bayo wants to arrange or put together an operation to get in there and get those 2 officers, bring them back to the States, and then, of course, with a lot of publicity, embarrass the president into taking action against Cuba. That's what this whole thing is about. So Bayo takes his story to several members of the Miami anti-Castro community. That includes William Pauly. We're going to discuss William Pauly. It includes John Martino. We're going to talk about John Martino. It includes David Morales. We're going to talk a lot about David Morales. It includes William Rip Robertson. We're going to talk a lot about William Rip Robertson and Frank Sturgis. And we will continue to talk about Frank Sturgis. These are all people that are movers and shakers in this anti-Castro community. And they're all connected, mostly to the CIA. Some of them have dual connections, like Frank Sturgis is a Cuban, but he's also CIA. So William Pauly takes this news to Shackley. He knows who's in charge of JM Wave. He says they're going to get anything done officially, they need to go through Shackley. And so he convinces Shackley to help Pauly's team. Pauly is going to be transporting this S Force, which is this, he just refers to it as his team, but it's the S Force. This assassination team has been put together by Santos Trafficante at the behest of Richard Nixon, who was the vice president when this was all put together. And they're going to go in, they're going to get these two officers. And while they're there, since this is what the S Force does, they're going to take a shot at Castro and try to kill him. And, that would just be like killing two birds with one stone. And Paulie has a yacht, and they're going to go from Miami, Biscayne Bay in Miami, across the straits into close to Cuba, and they're going to disembark from the yacht into a rubber dinghy, and they're going to sneak ashore in Cuba, and they're going to run into Havana and cause all kinds of problems. They're going to find these officers. This is the plan. It's called Operation Tilt. I've put a picture here of the main participants. There's Eddie Bayo at the top where my cursor is, pictured again at the top, sitting there with John Martino. John Martino is right underneath Eddie Bayo. William Pauly is underneath John Martino, and off to the right is William Rib Robertson, who's not pictured in this particular photograph collage. It's Frank Sturgis and or David Morales, but we'll have ample photos of them coming up. So this is Operation Tilt, and so then spinning it forward in the fall of '63, which we're getting close now to the D-Day, the moment where JFK himself was assassinated. Ted Shackley and Carl Jenkins, another CIA. Carl Jenkins, we first learned about in conjunction with William Rip Robertson. Those were the two trainers of the S Force down in Mexico. So Carl Jenkins is CIA. So Shackley, who is CIA, and Jenkins used members of Operation Mongoose, the Cubans, the mob and the Cubans down in Miami, in their continuing attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro using the S Force, because that would make sense since Carl Jenkins was the trainer of the S Force. I have him pictured here. Ted Shackley is the top picture, and then Carl Jenkins is down at the bottom. According to documents, Shackley and Jenkins continued to use Operation Mongoose and the S Force against Castro, and this becomes a real problem once JFK finds out about it. For a long time, JFK and his brother didn't know anything about any of this, and until Khrushchev brings it to his attention. Hey, you promised once, and I know you lied to me after Bay of Pigs, but then you promised again after Cuban Missile Crisis to leave Cuba alone, and you got people that are launching raids against Cuba. They're bombing Soviet ships or sitting in the harbor down there. What's going on? Did you lie to me again? And so this time, we've talked about this story. Bobby goes down. JFK, first of all, orders them to cease and desist. They completely violate this order. Operation Tilt was after that order, and they just went anyway, pretend like they didn't hear his order. One of them came out of the Everglades, led by E. Howard Hunt. Another one came out of No Name Key and Frank Sturgis. And these eventually, Bobby had to send down customs officials, U.S. Marshals, anybody he could find he could trust, to literally close down these Operation 40/Operation Mongoose / S Force bases. All those 5 bases that I mentioned. They had to literally take the weapons away from everyone down there. They had to burn out the bases, take their C4, take their explosives, take their weapons, take their ammo, and they had to arrest several of the leaders of these bases. 2 of them in particular that are important to our discussion. Frank Sturgis gets arrested. E. Howard Hunt gets arrested for violation of the Neutrality Act. And they were literally conducting their own private war against a country with whom we were not at war. And and then on November 22, 1963, the S Force, having by this point switched targets because they're so furious, they can't get to Castro because Kennedy won't let them. And so by November 22nd, 1963, the S Force has switched targets. And it was they, according to Santos Trafficante, who assassinated JFK in Dallas. and they used the identical tactics. Carl Jenkins and William Robertson had been the trainers of the S Force for several years down in Mexico, and their training involved hitting a moving target from distance with high-powered rifles and scopes, and using triangulation of fire. That's why they were called the Triangular Fire Team. 3 teams. And if you look at JFK and how he was shot, he was a moving target from distance, high-powered rifles with scopes, and he was hit from 3 different sides. The first shot hit him square in the neck, front shot. The second shot hit him in the back, or second hit, and the third hit hit him side of the head. So front, back, side, 3 teams. They used the exact same training that they were using, undergoing, trying to kill Castro. They used that same training to kill Kennedy. All right, so that's Ted Shackley. How about William Harvey? My goodness, this guy is. Well, you look at any nefarious activity the CIA was involved in this period of time, William Harvey's in it. He's doing it. He's part of it. He's either leading it, he's neck deep in it, he's writing up the origination documents, the creation documents for ZR rifle, for example. He's got his fingerprints all over everything. I like that movie I was recommending earlier, The State. It's called The Company, because it shows the character profile of William Harvey, in a cinematic way. But he was known as he was a drunk, and he was sort of a blowhard, and he was virulently anti-communist, and he was one of these guys that didn't take well to being. He didn't respond well to authority. He liked to make up his own rules, and when people put guardrails on him, he'd go off the reservation, and he was a loose cannon, was what he was. And it's not something that started when he was in the CIA. He was that way. I just think that's who he was. In fact, he got fired from the FBI in 1947. I don't know all the circumstances. I wouldn't be surprised if it has something to do with insubordination. Anyway, he joins the CIA shortly thereafter. And if you know the timetable and all that, that's when the CIA was. 47 is when the National Security Act got passed, which created the CIA, 5412 committee, et cetera, et cetera. So timing couldn't have worked out better for a guy like William Harvey. According to Richard D. Mahoney, who's done a lot of research on William Harvey, written a good book about it, quote, William K. Harvey, a squat, balding tank of a man with eyes that bulged because of a thyroid condition, no doubt because of his heavy drinking, began assembling a squad of assassins recruited from the ranks of organized criminals in Europe. Okay, this is one of his first tasks as a CIA operator now, and that's what we know as executive action. He directed executive action, and without getting into all the specifics that I'd be going off on a rabbit trail, executive action was a series of coups d'etats, government overthrows and assassinations, etc., that included Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954. But there are others. There are many others. And so it was primarily located in either the Middle East, places like Iran, Guatemala, or Middle East would be Iran, or Latin or South America, which would be Guatemala, and countries where the CIA was very interested in preventing the communists from expanding into it. So we were neck deep in trying to put our people in charge of these countries, our little puppets, so we could maneuver them around like chess pieces on a chessboard. Because the Soviets were trying to do the same thing from their end. So it was just back and forth between us and the Soviets. In March of 1960, President Eisenhower approved a CIA plan to overthrow Fidel Castro. Now, I always thought that was, for years, I thought that was because Eisenhower himself this was a philosophical thing between him and Castro, between capitalism and communism, between a free society and a authoritarian society between the the East and the West, between us and the Soviets, etc. I am more and more convinced that this was instigated by his vice president, Richard Nixon, who had investments in Cuba, who had a personal axe to grind with Castro, who had friends, mafia friends, primarily, who had connections and an interest in Cuba and hated Castro, and also CIA contacts. And he was, as vice president, he was head of the 5412 committee. So they did all the covert stuff. And the CIA was anti-Castro. So I am more and more convinced it was Nixon behind this. And since Nixon, by the time we get to March 1960, we're in an election year. If you're Eisenhower, you're hoping your successor is going to be Nixon. So if Nixon comes to you and says, I want this, you're probably going to give it to him. You're probably going to allow him to run off with this, run wild with it, because he's going to be president for the next 8 years anyway. And if this is what he wants, give it to him. Anyway, whether it was Eisenhower or Nixon or a combination of the two, the plan involved a budget of about $13 million. It doesn't sound like a lot of money today. In 60, that's a lot of money. And their objective primarily was to train a paramilitary force outside Cuba for guerrilla action. Okay, where is the largest concentration of Cubans that we can train for this paramilitary action, this guerrilla action, this paramilitary force? Well, it's in Miami. It's in South Florida, because by this time we got this refugee flood coming from Havana to Miami. It's just boatload after boatload. And that's, and of course, this is supposed to be covert, right? And it's supposed to look like Cubans against Cubans. So we're not going to launch a U.S. military operation. We're not going to use people from Chicago or from Kansas. It makes sense to train these Cubans who are mostly male, mostly military age, and are very motivated. All they need is some weapons and some training. So it just like fell into our laps. These people that we could train to go do the dirty work for the CIA. Of course, we know that as the Bay of Pigs. And of course, that didn't work. What a disaster that was. But as we learned, President Kennedy doubled down afterwards. And he created that committee. It's called the SGA. And this committee met at the House, at the White House on November 4th, 1961, and decided to call this covert action program for sabotage and subversion Operation Mongoose. Now, you say, well, why did they change the name? It was Operation 40. Took us through Bay of Pigs. Kennedy, again, just a reminder, promised Khrushchev he was done trying to meddle in the affairs of Cuba. And that was one of the reasons why the Cubans population, once they heard about that, got upset with Kennedy. But then secretly behind Khrushchev's back, he doubles down, and then they're like, oh, okay, I see what he's doing. He's just saying that to appease Khrushchev. But really, he's just changed the name to Operation Mongoose. And we've got all these 5 bases down here, and all systems are go. All right. In fact, we have more money now. We have more resources and more partners involved. And it's actually grown. It's not gone away. It's grown. And so this is Kennedy's decision. All right. It's important to know that Kennedy initially was going along. This is one of the fascinating things about JFK. When he came to the White House, he was young, he was inexperienced, and he believed just about everything he was told. Every time the CIA opened its mouth and told him something, he believed them. It took disasters like Bay of Pigs. It took near disasters like Cuban Missile Crisis. It took all of these things happening and all their prophecies not coming true and all their predictions and all their promises, and for him to realize these people are lying to me. These people don't know any more about what's fixing to happen than the man walking down the street. This included the Joint Chiefs, the CIA, the Pentagon. A lot of these people that they came into office believing, it didn't take them long. Both Kennedy brothers stopped believing them. And that was a big part of the reason why they turned. And a big part of the reason why these forces came to the conclusion that Kennedy was their problem, not Castro. If they're ever going to deal with Castro, they're going to have to deal with Kennedy first. He's turned on us. Um, and of course, as we've learned, the CIA JM Wave Station in Miami served as operational headquarters for Mongoose, and Harvey was in charge of Task Force W. And so you've got two guys down here in Miami now, Ted Shackley and William Harvey, who are neck deep in all of these operations trying to overthrow Castro or assassinate Castro. And they're all operating out of Miami, and they've got a big force sitting there at their feet, motivated, willing to die for the cause. All these Cuban exiles who are chomping at the bit as like this paramilitary force, this little army, the CIA army, led by Shackley, led by Harvey, to go cause trouble in Cuba. Now, I wanted to, while we're talking about Harvey, I just wanted to accentuate the ZR rifle program, which came later. This is in 61. So, in 60, we learned that he became part of an executive action program to kill a foreign head of state or assassinate or overthrow their government. That was ongoing. Okay, that's still with the left hand. William Harvey is still operating executive action, still involved. But with the right hand, he's been charged with something new, something top secret. It's called ZR rifle. We didn't learn about this until the 70s with the Church Commission. And literally on January 26, 1961, on a 9-page handwritten document written by William Harvey and Arnold Silver, they created what this is called the creation document. It creates this program called ZR rifle. Now, I've done an entire episode on ZR rifle and everything we know about it, so I won't go into all the details, but this was a American program recruiting American assets. These are criminals and or CIA in-house assets. And I'll tell you, mostly these are CIA in-house assets for, quote, direct personal action. Those are William Harvey's words in the creation document. Direct personal action is assassination. It's just a fancy way of saying it. And against an American target. That's what distinguishes ZR rifle from executive action. You look at the beginning date of ZR rifle. According to the creation document, it began in May 1961. This is 5 months after JFK took office. This is right. May is 1 month after Bay of Pigs, which, of course, the CIA blamed on Kennedy. So 1 month after this covert operation goes bad, and the CIA blames Kennedy, and Kennedy blames the CIA, and it turns into this private war between the CIA and the White House. The CIA, led by William Harvey, create an assassination program to take out an American target. ZR rifle officially ended in April of 64. This is 5 months after JFK was assassinated. Now, I don't believe in coincidences, folks. ZR rifle was created by the CIA by William Harvey. And when I say it was created by the CIA, it's because all these documents had to be signed off on by Allen Dulles. And there's a chain of command there, but Allen Dulles was at the top. He had to sign off on it. He's the director of the CIA. He signed off on this. Okay. So this is still to this day the longest and most complex operation conducted by a specialized team. So you talk about 3 years, right? May of 61 to April 64, spanning the entire duration of JFK's presidency. It started literally a month after Bay of Pigs and shut down 5 months after he was killed. And of course, it was headed up by Harvey and Silver. They're the ones who drew up the creation document to begin with. This is William Harvey. So, as I said, left hand executive action, right hand ZR rifle. And he's still officially by the CIA in charge of Task Force W, which is to take out Castro. And he's working with Ted Shackley. And all this is happening out in Miami. On March 12, 61, this is part of executive action. Remember, he's doing these things simultaneously. It was Harvey who arranged for CIA operative Jim O'Connell to meet, now he's meeting his mafiosos friends, Sam Giancana, Santos Trafficante, Johnny Rosselli, Robert Mayhew, the attorney who represented Howard Hughes, at that same hotel in Miami. My God, they don't even pick a new place. They just keep going back to the Fontainebleau. During the meeting, O'Connell gave poison pills and $10,000 cash to Rosselli to try to get Castro. So here we see Harvey is simultaneously directing two assassination programs from JM Wave, from Task Force W. One is aimed at Castro and any foreign head of state that's problematic. The other is aimed at an American target. Of course, we know who that is. So, like I said, William Harvey is at the center of this. He is so key. You understand Harvey, you understand what the CIA was doing in the 60s and using guys like William Harvey. He somehow disqualified himself from working for J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, but Alan Dulles found him quite useful. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Bobby Kennedy told CIA Director John McCone, by this time, Kennedy had fired Alan Dulles. Now John McCone was in charge. And he told McCone, I'll halt all covert operations aimed at Cuba. We know you got a whole rat's nest of stuff going on down there in Florida aimed at Cuba. Stop it. Cease and desist. Stand down. And a few days later, he found out that Harvey had just ignored this order, and he had dispatched 3 commander teams from Miami into Cuba, and their purpose was to prepare for what he believed would be an inevitable invasion. So they're going there as sort of like an advance team, trying to provoke a war. This is one of the things that these guys like E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, Harvey, that's what they're doing. They're trying to provoke something. All right. So they keep launching these things. More and more, I am just amazed at the self-restraint of guys like Khrushchev. You could say Castro. Castro's not going to launch an operation back against the United States. He's not going to declare war, but Khrushchev could. And Cuba was a client state of Soviet Union. And Khrushchev could, any one of these times, happened multiple times, interpret this as JFK breaking his promise. But he restrained. And it must have been maddeningly frustrating to guys like William Harvey that all of these efforts to provoke this war, this long sought after war with Cuba and Castro, they wouldn't take the bait. Of course, Kennedy finds out about it. He's furious. And he's made this promise to Khrushchev. He's trying to make good with Khrushchev after he lied to him the first time. So he removes, as punishment, remember now, he arrested guys like Hunt and Sturgis. He removed Harvey as commander of Zero Rifle, which he's found out about. He's found out about now. He removes him as commander, and he banishes him. Evidently, it's hard to fire guys like Harvey, so he can't fire him. So he sends him to Italy, where he becomes the chief of station in Rome, knowing he found a CIA station in a faraway location that can't be a problem to any of this Cold War intrigue that's going on between us and the Soviets. He's like, where can I send him? Where can I banish him? He won't cause any trouble. On October 30th, 62, Bobby, on behalf of his brother JFK, terminated all sabotage operations against Cuba. And this is, again, as a result of his promise that he made in Nikita Khrushchev. Now, this is later to be followed up with two attempts by, as I mentioned, E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, one from the Everglades, one from No Name Key, where they completely disobey Bobby's order, acting on behalf of the president, which is why they have to be arrested. And so if you're JFK, you are finding out that you have underneath you, CIA is part of the executive branch. And the flow chart puts the president at the top. He's the boss. And the boss is given orders, and his underlings are disobeying his orders left and right. Now, in a situation like most of us work in, where there's insubordination amongst an employee, that might cause, you might lose a contract, you might mess up a job, it might lose some money, it might be embarrassing, it might be just uncomfortable, or whatever. And this level, insubordination could lead to a nuclear war. The consequences are pretty dire. So JFK is learning that he's surrounded by snakes, and one of the biggest snakes is William Harvey. John Whitten, CIA investigator, who knew Harvey And when it was asked about him, said, quote, he was too young to have assassinated McKinley and Lincoln. And this is just him extrapolating out what everybody came to learn later about William Harvey, which is the guy was in charge of or involved in every assassination plot our government was ever involved in. If you want to investigate assassination during William Harvey's lifetime, you begin with him and at least eliminate him as a suspect, which probably he would be hard pressed to do because he's going to be involved in it. So now he's in Rome and he's the chief station chief there. And, Kennedy sent him over there thinking, well, maybe we found a place where he can't cause trouble. He immediately causes trouble there. He organizes false flag bombing raids against one of the parties there, the Christian Democrats, and blamed supporters of Apertura. Apertura was something that JFK supported, which was home rule, basically, where you have free elections and let the Italians choose whom they want to govern themselves. And of course, the CIA was interested in keeping their puppets in charge. And so he organizes these false flag bombing raids against Christian Democrat offices and newspapers. And he blames supporters of Apertura, hoping that the election, people would see that and say, well, we're not going to vote for Apertura. They're bombing their political opponents. It was all fake. It was all led by William Harvey. And he's taking the lessons that he's learned in America against Cuba and all these false flags that the CIA has been involved in throughout the 50s, Iran, Guatemala, et cetera, et cetera. And he's just applying them in Italy. And, people found out. But anyway, interestingly about Harvey, in November of 1963, this guy who has no business being in Dallas, he has no reason to be in Dallas. He is the station chief of the CIA in Rome. But according to a witness, Harvey flew from Italy to Dallas, and when he was asked by this witness, why are you going to Dallas? Good, honest question, right? He tells this witness, he says, to look around. This is November of 63. Now, again, this is the Hedley Dan Duke of all things assassination. And as leader of executive action, he has his fingerprints all over assassinations of foreign targets. But what people don't realize till later, Senator Church, Frank Church finds out. He's also leader of a assassination program for an American target named ZR Rifle. And even though Kennedy shut that down, do you think for a minute ZR Rifle's been shut down? It has not been shut down. And though and of course, Kennedy didn't order it to be shut down. He fired Harvey from being in charge of it, but that doesn't mean Harvey's not still aware of it or involved in it. And he perhaps is still in charge of it. He's not listening to Kennedy. And so here he is, the assassination guru, coming to Dallas in November 1963, a week before the president comes and is assassinated there. Why? To, quote, look around. Again, I don't believe in coincidences, folks. This is that guy. And the reason I'm bringing him up in mention of this series about Miami is because prior to being banished to Rome, he was operating out of Miami. He was in charge of all these assassination programs. So he had all these concurrent roles. He was involved with executive action, targeting unfriendly foreign leaders. He was a head of ZR Rifle, targeting an American. He was involved in Operation 40, was transitioned into Mongoose, and he was in charge of, he was involved in the S Force. Of course, the S Force's only purpose is to assassinate. It was created to assassinate Castro, so of course Harvey would be involved. And we know Harvey's involved. He wrote a series of memos about the S Force, so there's documents. And of course, he's also in charge of Task Force W, trying to figure out use a broad range of options to try to get rid of Castro. This guy has his fingerprints over everything. And for most of that period of time we're talking about, he was operating out of Miami. All right. I mentioned Carl Jenkins and William Rip Robertson. So here are those pictures again, that same picture of Carl Jenkins. I could not find. William Rip Robertson was a very difficult photograph to find. Here he is with a group, um, and he is kind of behind Ronaldo. You see there in that picture. I've got him circled in red. So that's William Rip Robertson. These are the CIA officers stationed in Miami that, upon request, once a month, whatever it was, when the S Force would be rounded up. Remember, they spread the S Force. There's 15 original names, and they put 3 at one base, 3 at another base. There was 5 bases, so you put 3 at each base. That's 15 total. Periodically, that was to hide them, right, in plain sight. You don't want to put them all together. So you just mix them in with everybody else, hide them in plain sight. And then once a month or whatever, the pilot, Tosh Plumley, would come around, pick them all up, fly them across the border into Mexico down to the ranch. It was owned by uh, the Dallas Cowboy guy. I'm trying to remember his name. Uh, can't believe I can't remember his name. It'll come to me. Anyway, there was a ranch down in southern Mexico, and Carl Jenkins and William Robertson would meet the team down there, and they would train them. And I remember the training was triangulated hit, moving target, 3 teams, high-power rifles with scopes. It was called the Triangular Fire Team. These guys are stationed in Miami, and then they are the S Force trainers for the CIA. You know, I've heard people say, well, the S Force was Santos Traficante's baby. Uh, uh, but that is negated by the fact that the mob was in partnership with the CIA. They went to him. There's evidence that they went to him, and he put this together at their request. And all the folks that were involved in the training of this S Force were CIA people. Here's William Rip Robertson, Carl Jenkins, the pilot who flew him around was Tosh Plumley. The bases where they were located, where they lived, were CIA bases for Operation 40 and then Mongoose. And of course, the whole thing was birthed by the 5412 committee chair, Richard Nixon, who at the time was vice president. So, I mean, it's CIA through and through. And so anyway, and these 2 guys are based out of Miami. I told you we would we'd talk about Frank Sturgis. Frank Sturgis is the Cuban who is a CIA asset. Several pictures there of Frank. He was a veteran of all things Operation 40, including Bay of Pigs. According to his own words, he was a self-described CIA assassin. When he was asked what who his employer was and what his occupation was, he was a CIA assassin. He was one of the Watergate burglars, by the way. And if you remember that scene from All the President's Men, when they got arrested, the burglars were standing in front of the judge the next morning at the arraignment, and they all said they were retired Cuban freedom fighters, because 4 of them were Cuban, including Frank Sturgis. And the judge says, well, that's an interesting occupation, but what do you do for a living? And they kept stalling. And finally they had to divulge one by one that they were CIA. Some of them said they were retired, but they were all CIA. And Frank Sturgis was one of them. So he was involved in covert stuff with respect to the CIA, going back late 50s all the way into the 70s. Okay. He was a liaison to the S Force at the No Name Key base. He was one of those that Kennedy eventually had to arrest because he kept launching invasions after they were ordered to stand down. He was he along with E. Howard Hunt, which, by the way, ironically, was another Watergate burglar. Now, he wasn't a burglar. He was across the street at the Howard Johnson Hotel acting as a lookout. But there were 7 people arrested as a result of Watergate in the days afterward. And, the original 5, and then when they found the walkie-talkie and the room key in one of the original 5's pockets, they realized there were some lookouts across the street, and they went and got them, and that was G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt. So just like Frank Sturgis was involved in all things CIA from the late 50s, all these covert operations, so was E. Howard Hunt. That's why these 2 are, that's why Nixon was so panicked when he saw E. Howard Hunt's name on the list of people who had been arrested because he knew how far back Howard Hunt went and his knowledge of this S Force that Nixon put together. Nixon wasn't worried about Watergate. Nixon was worried about the S Force. All right, so according to Howard Hunt, and this is a picture of Hunt here at the top, uh, this is something that Hunt denied and denied and denied for years. There was all kinds of suspicion, even from his own son, his own family members suspected that he had been in Dallas on the day JFK was killed. Hunt always denied it. In fact, he sued Liberty Lobby over their inference that he had been involved in the assassination plot to kill Kennedy. He lost because the jury didn't believe him. But anyway, he always denied this until about the time he was ready to die, even though his own wife, who was a partner with him, also a CIA asset, was killed by the CIA after Watergate because she was threatening to go public with what she knew. Though his own wife was killed by the agency for whom he worked, he kept quiet till the day he died. But on his deathbed, he finally revealed the truth. And his son was there, a reporter was there. They got it on, they recorded his words. He wrote down a little flow chart. I'll show you that in a minute. I think it's on this episode. And anyway, he said that in 1963, he had been invited to Miami. All right, so it's going to circle back to Sturgis, but E. Howard Hunt is saying that what happened was I got invited to Miami in 1963 by Sturgis, who was in Miami, and I was recruited for an off-the-board operation by David Morales. Here's David Morales. He is a CIA assassin. So he gets to Miami. Sturgis gets him to Miami. When he gets there, David Morales recruits him into this off-the-board operation. And according to Hunt, Sturgis and Morales, they themselves had been recruited into this off-the-board operation prior by William Harvey. Any surprise? And he says, my involvement in this off-the-board operation was to be a, quote, bench warmer, which is he described as an overseer or somebody who might stand in for somebody else in a pinch in what he called the big event. And of course, the big event was the JFK assassination. So on his deathbed, E. Howard Hunt admitted, yes, I was in Dallas. Yes, I was part of the big event. I was a bench warmer. I didn't pull any triggers or anything, but I could have been. They needed me. I was there. And I was recruited by Sturgis, I was recruited by Sturgis Morales, and they were recruited by Bill Harvey, and it all happened in Miami. That lawsuit that I told you about, the Liberty Lobby lawsuit, the star witness in the case was Marita Lorenz. I've got her pictured here. She's a young woman in this case, but she corroborates E. Howard Hunt's story because she also was recruited in Miami for this off-the-board operation. And she says, and this is under oath, it's the only trial where a witness under oath implicates the CIA. You know, the CIA would have been implicated if Lee Harvey Oswald had gone to trial, but they killed him. The CIA would have been implicated if Jack Ruby had gone through a second trial, but he died of cancer in 28 days. There are any number of people that would have implicated the CIA if there had been a trial. If you fast forward to the late 60s and the Clay Shaw trial, if David Ferrie lives, the CIA would have been implicated, but he died. He was suicided. The same day David Ferrie died, the other star witness, Eladio Del Valle, would have implicated the CIA if he had lived to testify. But he died. He got a hatchet through the head. I mean, I could go on and on and on. All these people that died or disappeared or terrible things happened to them that would have implicated the CIA. But they never made it to trial. And here we have a civil suit. This isn't a criminal trial, which is probably the only reason it happened. No one's going to go to jail over this. And in this civil suit, E. Howard Hunt is suing Liberty Lobby because they published in their magazine, I forget the name of the publication. Anyway, the company that owned the publication was called Liberty Lobby, and he sued saying, you defamed my character because you said I was part of the JFK plot. And initially he won, but on on appeal, they found Marita Lorenz. The attorney, Mark Lane, found Marita Lorenz, brought her to the trial, and she tells this story. Now, E. Howard Hunt is still denying that he has anything to do. Later, when he confesses, it completely corroborates everything Marita Lorenz said earlier in the Liberty Lobby trial. And she said that she, Sturgis, and E. Howard Hunt were all members of Operation 40, CIA. She was first recruited in Miami by Sturgis to assassinate Fidel Castro in 1960. She tells this fantastic story how she they give her these poison pills. She puts it in her face cream. She goes over there, and she had a prior relationship with Castro. They were lovers, and so she could get close to him. Well, she chickened out. She fell for Castro again. They made love and all this stuff. And when she went to retrieve the poison pills, they had dissolved in the face cream. So she failed. She came back to Miami a failure. And she was later recruited in Miami by Sturgis to help with this off-the-board operation in '63. From from the time that she was first recruited in as Operation 40, her job descriptions changed. First she was helping with Operation 40, which was sabotage, propaganda, etc. And then it's recruited to go back to Castro, trying to assassinate. Then she fails in that. They bring her back, and she becomes a gun runner for the CIA. And that's primarily what she did, according to her own words. But then she gets recruited by Sturgis in Miami in '63 for this off-the-board operation. And on November 21st, '63, she tells the story how they all traveled from Miami to Dallas with a carload of weapons. This is on November 21st, folks. November 21st. Does that ring a bell? All right. So according to her, uh, they they came to Miami or they came to Dallas. And they dropped off the weapons. They met at a hotel room. She witnessed E. Howard Hunt pay Sturgis, and then they get a knock on the door. It's Jack Ruby. Anyway, she tells the story, and the jury reverses the ruling and finds, according to the jury foreperson, that the CIA and E. Howard Hunt were involved in the assassination of JFK. So we actually have an official court ruling on record that the CIA killed JFK. Nobody hears about it when widely publicized. So, uh, again, E. Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis being recruited, Marita Lorenz being recruited. Where'd all this recruitment happen? Miami. By whom? William Harvey. It's all happening out of Miami. All right, William Pauley. William Pauley was not technically CIA. He was one of these off the books guys. His official resume, he was this businessman. He was a millionaire. He 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 organized the Flying Tigers in China during World War II at the behest of President Roosevelt. After the war, he became an ambassador to Peru and Brazil as reward for all his service. He was sort of the uh, forerunner to all things covert. He was uh, Roosevelt's own covert operator in the war in the Pacific, and they had his own pilots and his own planes. They call them the Flying Tigers, and they caused all kinds of problems for Japan. And and he was a hero. He was a swashbuckling guy. He was a big time womanizer. He was a good looking guy. He's kind of a Hollywood looking guy. He always had good looking women. His unofficial resume, that was all what everybody knew about him. His unofficial resume, he was a close friend of Allen Dulles, director of the CIA. He was uh, he was one of these guys, kind of like Howard Hughes, who operated in the shadows as part of the national security apparatus. Howard Hughes was that businessman who supported Nixon. William Pauley was a businessman who did anything his buddy Allen Dulles asked him to do. So he participated in the Guatemala coup in 1954. Uh, he helped convince Eisenhower into approving the Bay of Pigs plan. He was going to be involved in that. And so he is like Howard Hughes, you know, and these guys get used by folks in political office in official capacities because they're unofficial. They don't have direct ties. They have money, they have access, they have contacts. They're interested in these things because these are interests that might work against their business interests, etc. So they're very interested in what's going on around the world and who's a communist country, who's a free country, because they're trying to make money, right? So he's sort of like another Howard Hughes, and he's rabidly anti-communist, just like Howard Hughes was. And he blamed Castro sympathizers in the State Department for losing Cuba to begin with. So he was very much against. It's sort of like he's sort of like a Nixon guy. If you remember how Nixon came to fame, it was rooting out communist spies in the State Department and in Hollywood, and in the government itself, in the military, et cetera, through the HUAC hearings. William Pauly was one of those guys. He was a crusader, and he thought some of our government agencies, entities were being infiltrated by these communist spies. And when JFK, when Bay of Pigs happened, he blamed JFK. He was one of these guys who blamed JFK entirely for the failure. He wanted more than anything for Castro to be overthrown and for Cuba to go back to being a U.S. puppet state. And JFK failed, so he blamed him. So he had this axe to grind against Castro, obviously, but against Kennedy, because Kennedy failed to get rid of Castro. So on May 9th, 1962, he still got the ear of President Kennedy. Remember, I told you Kennedy came in listening to these kinds of people. Over time, he changed, and he stopped listening to them. And this was the last conversation he ever had with Pauly. He asked Pauly, what should we do about Cuba after the Bay of Pigs? And Pauly said, I think we have to drop 10,000 Marines in Havana. And Kennedy just looked at him like, are you crazy? Are you crazy? And so he never asked for Pauly's advice again. So that sort of became the end. That was sort of marked the end of that relationship. And so Pauly, from that point forward, was like a lot of these Cubans, like a lot of these CIA operators, like a lot of these mafiosos, an enemy of Kennedy. And it all goes back to the Bay of Pigs and the Cuba policy. In June of 63, it was Pauly's yacht, that Flying Tiger II, that left Miami's Biscayne Bay and headed towards Cuba. And that was the boat that was carrying the S Force. You remember, Eddie Bayo said there were two officers in Cuba, Russian officers, Soviet officers, that wanted to defect to the United States, come back to the United States, and tell the story that Khrushchev and Castro were hiding missiles that were still operational aimed at the United States, and that they had duped JFK. It was supposed to be embarrassing to JFK. It's his boat, and they're leaving from Miami. They're picking up all these S Force members and an assortment of other people, whom I'm going to mention here in a minute, and they're heading towards Cuba. Even though technically we're not supposed to be, there's no war against Cuba, this is just something that the S Force is doing on its own. This has been approved, of course, by William Harvey, who's involved with the S Force, but also Ted Shackley, who's the CIA operational chief at JM Wave. It's all coming out of Miami. Now, on board, in addition to the S Force, on board was John Martino. We're going to talk about John Martino in a minute. He is a mafia security specialist at the time. William Rip Robertson, who is a trainer of the S Force. We've talked about him. Eddie Bayo, he's the guy that was a member of Alpha 66, one of those Cuban anti-Castro organization. He's the guy that came to them with the plan to begin with. So you got a mishmash of people. You got mafia, you got CIA, you got Cubans, and you got this off-the-board guy whose yacht they're using, and he's on board. He's leading it. Now, remember, this was Operation Tilt. They're going to smuggle these two colonels out of Cuba, and they're going to tell the story about the missiles, and it's going to embarrass JFK and possibly cost him the 64 election if you can get it out in the news that JFK got duped by Khrushchev. In the climate of the times, Americans were most concerned that their president be sufficiently anti-communist, tough on communism. If it can be proven that JFK is soft on communism and is a dupe of the communists of Khrushchev, it's going to be a real mark against him. It's going to be tough for him to overcome that in the election. And if they're able to assassinate Fidel Castro in the process, hey, That's his bonus. That's gravy, right? So that was Operation Tilt. And they're on this guy's boat, William Pauly's boat. Now, the reason we know all about this is because there was also a Time Life reporter, and I'm going to mention him in a minute, on boat. The Time Life, if you know anything about Operation Mongoose, not Mongoose, Mockingbird. Mockingbird was when the CIA infiltrated the U.S. media with all their people, and they've controlled several of the highest profile media personalities of the day, paid them whatever, and it gave them stories. And it was so the CIA could put their version of the story out first. And so, yeah, well, and it's the only operation to this day that never had a termination date. So it makes you wonder how many of our media are controlled by U.S. intelligence today. Well, one of the primary movers and shakers in U.S. media in 1963 was Time Life magazine. It was a big time publication, and it was controlled by the CIA. And so they had their own CIA reporter. His name was Dick Billings. He was on the boat, and his job was to take pictures of these two colonels. And that was what was going to be splashed across the media. These two colonels that have been rescued from Cuba and are now telling this story that's hugely embarrassing to Kennedy. And it was going to be, well, you talk about a scoop, right? Well, years later, Dick Billings, who was on the boat during all of these goings on, tells this story. So this is first person account from Dick Billings, who's on the boat. And we have the story that happened between Pauly and John Martino. After they dropped off the S Force, they disappeared into the night, into the water to go to Cuba and do what they were trying to do. Guys like Pauly and Martino and Dick Billings and several others are sitting around on the boat waiting for the S Force to come back. And they're trying to kill time. And they're drinking. And one of the guys, John Martino, he's this crazy, out of his mind drinking. And he's just screaming about JFK and how he's taken all the C4 and he's shut down the Operation Mongoose bases and he's betrayed the cause and blah, blah, blah. He's just ranting and raving. And Dick Billings tells this story. And Pauly, trying to calm him down, says, "Don't worry, John. We're going to kill that motherfucker." And he's talking about JFK. And this is an S Force operation, which of course the S Force is trained as it's an assassination team. This is not William Pauly talking to, a bowling league or something, and just speaking off the cuff. This is Pauly, who has all these connections to Allen Dulles and the CIA, national security apparatus. He's currently on a mission, a secret mission to try to kill Castro and capture these two colonels. And this is the kind of guy who's telling John Martino, he's speaking with authority is what he's speaking with. And he's telling John Martino, don't worry, we're going to kill him. To try to calm Martino. And Dick Billings remembers hearing this and he's like, huh, wow. And then after, a couple months later, let's look at the date on this. June of 63. So you're talking less than 6 months later, JFK is dead. And that's when Dick Billings puts two and two together and realizes, he meant it. The same people that are off our boat right now trying to kill Castro are going, he didn't say they're going to kill him. He says, we're going to kill him. He's speaking as the S Force. And this is corroboration of what Santos Trafficante said in 72 after the Watergate. He's telling the law firm, you really want to know the story about these Cubans? You really want to know the story about, let me tell you about the S Force and who put it together and who they eventually killed. And he says, this S Force killed Kennedy. And here is, in real time, William Pauly saying the S Force is going to kill Kennedy. So, anyway, January 7th, 1977, this guy, Pauly, was just about ready to testify. He had been targeted by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and he was supposed to do an interview, and they found him dead of a bullet wound to his chest. His death was ruled, of course, a suicide. Just like George de Montesquieu died after being invited to testify for the House Select Committee. Just like Sam Giancana died during his testimony to the House Select Committee. Just like Johnny Rosselli died during his testimony to the House Select Committee. I could go on, folks. I could go on. This is why I say earlier, every time the CIA could get implicated in a trial or in some sort of under oath testimony situation, these people end up dead. All right. Okay, so that's William Pauly, and again, it's all happened out of his boat left Biscayne Harbor in Miami. Dick Billings is the reporter. Now, I don't have Dick Billings in here as a CIA operator necessarily, but he's an asset. He's an asset, and his job is to uh, portray whatever the CIA gives him as terms of stories and photos to the American people, whatever version of events the CIA wants him to portray. He's one of these Operation Mockingbird uh, reporters, and he's working for Time Life, and that's why he got access. That's why he was on that boat with William Pauly that night. Henry Luce owned Time Life. He was the editor, he and his wife, and he was one of the CIA's Operation Mockingbird conquest. And that's why they got some of the stories and photos that they got, like the Lee Harvey Oswald cover in '64, which was one of their top selling editions. Uh, Look at that photo, the backyard photo, right? Many people believe that that photo was staged. It was fake. It was phony. But in the eyes of the American people in 1964, that convicted Lee Harvey Oswald. That told the CIA version of events. That told the government narrative. That cover, just the cover. And then later, the Zapruder film, which was certain frames of the film were, according to J. Edgar Hoover, they were uh, reversed. Of course, he said it was an accident to show the head responding to the gunshot going forward, not backward, to show him being shot from behind, which is in line with the government narrative that Lee Harvey Oswald shot from behind. They were going to get access to the pictures. You know, the Dick Billings was on that boat for two reasons. He was going to get pictures of the officers that they rescued, but he was also going to get pictures of the body of Castro. If the S Force was successful in assassinating Castro, they were going to bring Castro's body back to the yacht, and he was going to get pictures. All that was going to be in Time Life. Imagine how many uh, the scoop that would be. And of course, he was going to get the story from the Soviet officers, from the Soviet missiles still. This is what happens when the CIA infiltrates a media organization. Sometimes it is through infiltration. They put their people in. That's why when you watch CNN Today or MSNBC or some of these channels, they anytime there's a national security event, they bring out the former FBI director or the former head of national security or the former CIA director, and they just straight from the horse's mouth, without any pretenses, they just get the intelligence spin on it on the news. We're sitting there lapping it up. But a lot of these infiltrators, we don't know who they are. We don't know that they've been corrupted by the CIA. We don't know that they're controlled by the CIA. Find out later, right, that they're just mouthpieces for the CIA. But sometimes they use money. Sometimes they use stories, and it helps advance one of these media personalities' career. They give them access. They give them scoops. They leak, and that's a way to get their cooperation. And that's how U.S. intelligence agencies control the media. They use leaks and scoops. They use leverage like blackmail. They use money, uh, maybe even use threats. I don't know. But they have the Operation Mockingbird, as I said, is the only operation we know of that had no termination date, which evidently says to me, anyway, that the CIA continues to believe it's in its best interest to control the news, censor what the American people know about CIA operations, about the CIA in general. And they use these media personalities. They use redactions when they're forced to release documents. Uh, it's a real problem with respect to transparency, and we only know about this story about William Pauly and John Martino because Dick Billings was on that boat. Unfortunately, he told the story years later. This is John Martino. This is the guy William Pauly was talking about. He was a militant Cuban exile. I could have included him in episode one. He was an exile. He lived in Miami. So this is how he came into contact with all these moving parts, ended up on that boat with the S Force. And like I said, he was ranting and raving like a madman about JFK shutting down the Mongoose bases. And that's when Paulie told him, "Don't worry, John, we're going to kill that motherfucker." So again, sometimes it's difficult. You trying to figure out, okay, which episode should I talk about this guy? Because he's technically a Cuban exile. But how we know him is because of his affiliation with all things CIA, and that's where he was. That's where he was when his moment in time, his claim to fame happened. So, as I said, I could have put Martino in episode one with all the other Cuban exiles, but anyway, he ended up here. So there's such a crossover. It's that braid again. It's the Cuban exiles working with the mob, under the mob, and both of them working in concert with the CIA, and they're all working together. And they all have different business cards and different addresses of whom their employer is, but they're all working for the same purposes, towards the same end. So that is episode 3 of the Miami series. And until next time, I hope everybody has a blessed day. Thank you.